episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Outside the Panels. I am your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, here again with another comic book legend. Joining me for today's chat is none other than Mr. Spaceways himself, Mr. Ron Marz. Ron, how's it going?
It's good. You make me sound like a lot bigger deal than I am. So I'm totally good with that.
So hey, self-deprecation is a British thing, so like that's my thing. So don't be trying to funk up my vibe there, man. So for those that have recently just kind of wandered into the comic book scene, Ron Marz is a bit of a name. Over the last few years, dare we say decades, Ron?
Decades, yeah, plural.
Oh, how's that sound?
It's sort of baffling to me that I've been doing this almost 30 years because, I still feel like I'm kind of learning what I'm doing. And obviously I'm still like 29. So the I've been doing this for 30 years is an odd mathematical problem.
Hey, that's comic book continuity in full effect.
There you go. Everybody stays 35 forever.
Yeah, Batman's celebrating 80, yet still looks no more than 29, right?
Yeah.
That is some crazy Lazarus Pit action going right on there. Right, so take us back all the way back to 30 years ago. How did you manage to break into comic books?
This is a question I get asked, at most panels or most signings. Well, how did you break in? And my story is embarrassingly simple. I was friends with Jim Starlin because we lived in the same area. I had copy edited Jim's first prose novel for him. And we were friends. We played racquetball, went out to dinner, went to see movies. And I was working as a journalist. I had just graduated from college and was working at a journalist as a daily newspaper. And one day Jim said, you should think about writing comics. Good way to put food on the table.
All right.
And that's not, he said, what do you think? Do you want to try that? And I'm, of course you're thinking, well, duh, of course I want to try that. And I was a fan of comics and, sort of around the local people who were doing comics, which was Starlin and Bernie Wrightson, Terry Austin, Fred Hembeck, Barry Windsor Smith, the whole, Joe State and the whole group that was here. So I was kind of in the midst of that group. And Jim took me by the hand and showed me the ropes, led me into Marvel, did my first few jobs with me, and I've been doing it ever since. I haven't, for the most part, I haven't worked an honest day since.
You've just named so many like creators that I'm really, really big fans of. Barry Windsor Smith, I absolutely adore. I have his Marvel Machine Man 2020 stuff. I can't believe how cheap I got it. There you go. That's the power of Machine Man, I guess, in the UK. But Barry Windsor Smith is one of those names that's just so evocative of that sort of like late 80s, early 90s Marvel. So absolutely. And Jim Starlin, was there any sort of pressure, I guess? Maybe not pressure. What's the perception then if you've been working as like a copy editor for novels and a journalist to sort of like turn around and say, right, hey, I'm going into comic books? Because, back then, I suppose comic books were kind of like they're not the mainstream element that they are now, thanks to the Big Bang. I hate the Big Bang.
Yeah, they certainly weren't mainstream in the sense of the sort of the fact that we have a comic book movie that opens in cinemas every 2 months, and there's 15 different comic book shows on TV all the time. So it was very much a sort of under the radar thing, but it was, people still knew comics.
Uh-huh.
I think since sort of the, mid 80s when Dark Knight and Watchmen came out and comics grew up a little bit, it was a little bit more, known, a little bit more mainstream.
Okay.
But, it wasn't, and to a certain extent, it's still this way. People don't really understand what the job is. When you sit next to somebody on an airplane and you end up, having small talk, and they say, "Well, what do you do?" And they say, "I write comic books." And
so you're the guy that draws them, right?
Yeah. So do you draw them too? Is always the first question, and then the next one is, do you put the words in the little bubbles?
I tell you what, I'm a friend of Ted Esposito, the letterer, who's like always on Twitter saying how letterers should have more credit, and he's absolutely bang on right. So if he listens to this podcast and you're saying that the writer comes after the artist and the letterer, he's going to have kittens.
Well, it's people just don't understand. People don't understand what I do, right? So they sure as hell don't understand what Taylor does. And in point of fact, to me, lettering is it's usually the last step in the creative process. And I always liken it to putting the icing on a cake. You can make an absolutely lovely, delicious cake, but if you put crappy icing on it, the whole thing's ruined. And if you do sort of half-ass crappy lettering, the whole comic's ruined. And and I've certainly had experience with some comics that just everything else works great, and the lettering is sort of amateurish. And by the end of the day, the whole thing is kind of, the lettering being amateur makes the whole thing look amateur. So yeah, I mean, you get to even now, people don't really grasp what a writer does. They can grasp what the artist does, because that's tactile, that's in front of them. Yeah, but as far as like how someone actually writes these things and what that process is like, it's still a bit of alchemy to 99% of the public.
So you've kind of worked across both sides of the aisle from the big two point of view. So famously, Marvel have their house style where it's kind of very much an open script. DC historically are kind of like the opposite of that with their full script methods. Which do you prefer to provide your artists then? Or does it depend on which book you're working on? Because I imagine that even though Silver Surfer and Green Lantern, for example, the books which I dare say you're probably the most famous for, is they're both space books. They're both totally different.
Well, it's, my preference is to work in the method that is preferred by the artist. My take on it is how, I always tell people that the writer's job is to make a blueprint. And then the blueprint is handed to the artist, and the artist is the one who actually builds the house. So I will make that blueprint in whatever fashion you want. I do a lot more work full script than I do sort of plot style, because that's really the preferred method by a lot of editors now. I think there are a lot of editors who don't know how to handle a Marvel style plot anymore. I always feel like it's my job to give the artist as much information and as much detail as possible, as much as they want. And then the artist can choose to adhere to it or ignore it as they see fit as they're building the pages. It's very much a collaborative process. And I don't want to work with somebody who just is there to be a human Xerox machine, who's just there to take my script and draw it exactly like it's written, because then we're only really getting the creative output of one person, me, and it's not enough. It's the magic of comics. The place where it really works is when the writer and the artist are both bringing their creativity and bringing their imagination to the page. I tend to be somewhat old school in that I don't really want to write a script until I know who's going to draw it.
All right, okay, that's cool.
That tends to be somewhat difficult in especially for Marvel and DC these days, where these are big monthly machines where things are being churned out, and there's a constant artist turnover, particularly at DC, where they're doing a lot of the books are being done twice a month. The train has to keep running, so sometimes you don't have that luxury, but I try to make sure that I know who I'm writing for, and I'm familiar with their art and what they do and how they storytell, so that I can craft my script to best take advantage of what they do.
All right. Okay. So then take it back just like a couple of steps there. In the past, you've kind of been associated with Silver Surfer. Was that your first book? Is that kind of the breakthrough book that you had?
Yeah, that was the first thing that I ever did. That was the first comic I wrote, period. Ashamedly so. I got to break in by writing Silver Surfer. I didn't toil on small press books. I didn't work for secondary publishers. I got to start at Marvel, and that's
okay.
That's obviously extremely unusual. It was less unusual then because there were less publishers then, but nowadays you certainly don't. You don't get to start on a Marvel book, not without pelts on the wall from other credits or other media. It just doesn't happen. So that was my first. That was my on-the-job training. That was my first gig in comics, and fairly soon. I probably within a year of breaking in, Jim had turned the regular series over to me so he could work on Infinity Gauntlet, and start the Warlock monthly series. So it was, I was really it was a test of fire. I was kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool, not too long after I started.
Okay, cool. If memory serves, and I haven't Googled this, I should really do that before I do these sort of things, but was Ron Lim your penciler back on that book?
Yeah, Ron Lim was my regular penciler.
Check me out. I've got game.
How about that? He was my regular penciler. Thank God, because I obviously learned a huge amount working with an established pro like Ron, and seeing how my scripts translated into his pages. That's sort of a light bulb moment for every writer of comics, is that when you see what your script turns into, you really understand the process a lot better. There's no more revelatory moment than when you get the first batch of pages from your first script. So working with Ron was a huge benefit for me, because he obviously saved my butt any number of times. He made me look good. I mean, that's one of the dirty little secrets of the business is as a writer, your story is only good as the person drawing it. So
see, I'm totally on the opposite for this. I remember. Do you remember after the Nightfall thing, and they had Bruce Wayne doing his own thing, trying to find out Sandra Kinsolvin and stuff like that? And some of the art in the Batman of the Shadow book, I can't remember who it was. It was just terrible art. It just didn't do anything for me at all. But it was the writing that kept me going. I was like, yeah, don't worry, it's Bruce Wayne. It's Bruce Wayne. And I was getting the writing, and it was fine. I would much rather read a well-written comic that's got art that doesn't quite agree with me than vice versa. Does that make sense?
It does. It's wrong, but it makes sense.
Not many people come on my show and tell me I'm wrong, but thanks for that. I appreciate that. No end.
Well, I think, ultimately the like I said, the crux of it is when the art and the story work together. That's when it's magic.
Totally get that. That's why you get Claremont and Jim Lee. That's when it works.
Right. But if I turn in a mediocre script, right, and they hand it to a genius artist, they hand it to Kevin Nolan to draw.
Kevin Nolan's great.
When that story's done, it's a brilliant story because Kevin Nolan drew it.
I get where you're coming from, because I've kind of had a bit of a thing for the recent Supergirl series from DC, and part of that's because Kevin Maguire's on the art, and it's like, wow, Kevin Maguire looks great. I love his pencils. Like, whoa. So I totally get it. I mean,
as a writer, you're ultimately judged by how good the story looks, or how well the story works artistically, and how the visual storytelling conveys the story that you're trying to tell. So
I'm not sure I agree 100%, but I get your point. I'll bow down to my wisdom.
Well, but again, if you've ever seen like the same page drawn by two different artists, one works better than another. And it's not even completely a qualitative thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's just what clicks. I mean, I've worked with tremendous artists, but their storytelling sensibility and mine maybe didn't match up on a particular project, so it's not quite what it should have been.
That's a fair shout.
It's more art than science. No pun intended. It's there's some sort of alchemy there that the artist brings to the page, and to me, it's always it's sort of a magic trick anyway, because I can't draw to save my life. I have no artistic ability whatsoever, but I can see the pages in my head. I can break down the action visually, and that's something I've always been able to do. But giving it to artist A or artist B results in a completely different story.
So then, if you can see it in your head, the story-wise, which artists do you see producing that work?
Well, hopefully it's like I said, hopefully I know who's drawing it, so I see what they do.
Right, so you're checking their backs, their back history of different stuff, and
you can you look at what they've done, and you look at how they approach a story, and you look how they frame a scene, and so you try to play into what they do best, and maybe avoid the things that they don't do as well. So ultimately, I think that the writer's job, and I don't mean just me, I mean anybody, the writer's job is to write the story that will allow the artist to best display their talents.
All right. Okay.
So I, one of the things I try to do with an artist when I'm working with them for the first time is contact them, email, Skype, however, and say, well, what do you want to draw and what do you not want to draw? And if it's, well, I want to, if we're doing a gritty detective story and the artist says, well, I want to draw dinosaurs. Okay, maybe that's not going to work out like we hoped, but at least get a sense of what can I put on the page that's going to make you excited to sit down at the drawing board every day.
See, I wish someone had done that with Rob Liefeld's ankles and feet, but never mind. That's a different story.
Well, it ultimately worked for him. It's maybe not a style that I'm enthusiastic about, but other people are, and that's cool.
Yeah. That's true. I'll give you that. Absolutely. So, Silver Surfer, historically, Jack Kirby creation with Stan Lee, huge presence thanks to Fantastic Four and the Galactus 3-issue run. Did you feel any pressure taking on board such an iconic character?
No, I didn't. Honestly, I didn't really feel a lot of pressure because I was maybe too dumb to understand what I was doing. I was too dumb to put that sort of pressure on myself. It was just, more than anything, just being excited about the opportunity in front of me and the fact that this was like the coolest job in the world. So I guess I had the pressure of wanting to make sure that I did a good job, but beyond, but feeling like you're walking in, Stan and Jack's footsteps or anything like that, I really didn't get caught up in that too much. I wanted to make sure that I didn't let down Starlin because he had given me this opportunity and obviously gone to bat for me with Marvel. So the biggest thing was don't screw this up because you don't want to embarrass your friend, and you want to keep doing it. You don't want to, you sort of get one or two chances to step up to the plate and take a swing at it, and you want to make sure that you do well enough that they keep allowing you to step in.
All right. Okay, that's a really cool. That's a cool way of thinking about it, especially. Starlin was pretty much a writing machine back then with the Infinity Gauntlet and so on. From there, the next time you popped onto my personal radar was, of course, the other spacefaring peeps in the comic book world, the mighty Green Lanterns. How was that for you?
It was great. It was, and sort of came about as a direct result of what I was doing on Silver Surfer, because the editor that initially brought me into DC was a fan of what I was doing on Surfer. So I did a few little jobs here and there for for Green Lantern Corps Quarterly was my first DC stuff, and that's very often how you start out at a publisher. Is you do little stuff. You do some short stories. You do an extra, an annual, or something like that. And if as long as you don't fall on your face, maybe they give you a little bit more. So I did some of those, and then I got a call to say, hey, do you want to take over the regular book? And here's what we're going to do with the regular book. So I got, my opportunity on the book came with, here's how Hal Jordan is going to be removed from the lead of the book, and here's what we want you to do in those first few issues. And after that, you're sort of turned loose on your own.
How do you feel as a writer then to kind of be like given training wheels, as it were, to sort of say, right, these are the beats of the story that we're gonna have to do because we want to do these, and then after that, you can sort the rest out yourself?
Well, it was, it's not terribly unusual, and frankly, it's more usual now where there's more editorial input and more editorial oversight on what you're doing on Big Two books. Because these properties are all obviously sort of multi-million or multi-billion-dollar franchises. So it's, there's always editorial give and take. And frankly, that's one of the skills you have to develop as a creator working in a shared universe is that, you're not completely the captain of your own ship. You get to, it's a negotiation. It's a give and take with editorial as to what their goals are, and editorially, I think it's got a lot more to do with what editor you click with than what company you're working for. It's a lot more personal relationship at that point.
I totally get that.
So when you find an editor that you work well with, you tend to stick with it. So for Green Lantern, for the Emerald Twilight story, DC gave me about a page and a half of notes of what they wanted those first 3 issues to be. And then after that, they just said, make up a new Green Lantern. I guess I didn't really realize it at the time, how astounding a vote of confidence, or at least, this, how much rope they gave us to kind of set off in a new direction on the book. I think there would obviously be a lot more editorial and corporate oversight if you were going to do that kind of storyline now. But for us, we got sort of the beats of the first 3 issues, and then go create a new Green Lantern, and we just made up Kyle Rayner as we saw fit, and they approved it, and I did the book for the next 7 years.
I have to be honest, I was kind of out of comic books around the time that Kyle Rayner came into the fold, as it were. Since my reintroduction into comic books, I've gone back and bought shed loads of Justice League like nobody's business. And I actually have a lot of love for Kyle. And I've said this before on various pods and various reviews. I get bored with Hal Jordan. I think Hal Jordan's like just too perfect. So I like the fact that they've got different Green Lanterns. I'm of an age where I remember Guy Gardner and John Stewart the first time around. So
sure. Well, I like Hal's character a lot, frankly, but I think he's not as he is emblematic of a lot of the DC Silver Age characters who were a little bit more vanilla in personality. And were to great extent heroes before they ever got their powers. Hal's a test pilot. He's basically Chuck Yeager. So he's a guy that's worth telling stories about before he ever becomes a Green Lantern. So when we created Kyle, the thing that was in my head was that if the editorial mandate here is that Hal's not going to be the star of the book anymore, let's do a character on the opposite end of the spectrum from Hal. Let's do somebody who doesn't really know what he's doing, somebody who's not a hero already, and somebody who has to grow into the role. So that was very much the idea behind Kyle, and I certainly have said this plenty of times previously that that I grew up reading Marvel books as a kid to great extent. You know, when I was in high school, I sort of discovered Wolfman and Perez's Teen Titans and the Batman books of that era. But when I was a kid, I grew up on Marvel books, and all of those characters were very much flawed. They all had some sort of internal flaw that made them more relatable to you, to you as the reader. So, you know, obviously the sort of everyman archetype that is most embodied by Peter Parker was what we went for with Kyle. I wanted the readers to be engaged in his life, whether he was in costume or not. I wanted, you know, that sense of Spider-Man having to be Spider-Man, but also in his other guise, trying to get a date and making sure Aunt May was okay, and making the rent and getting yelled at by his boss. Like all of that stuff that those classic Spider-Man issues went through, that was where we were pulling from for Kyle. I wanted that same sensibility of having the audience care about him enough that even if he didn't put the ring on for an entire issue, you were still engaged.
Cool. And that's the thing I like about Peter Parker, and I've said that again in the past. I'd rather read a Spider-Man book about Peter Parker than Spider-Man, which, hey ho. The whole Kyle Rayner thing came at the end of like a spate of, I'm going to say replacement heroes, because you had Thor getting replaced by Thunderstrike, you had Batman getting replaced by Asbats, you had Superman getting replaced by shed loads of different Supermen. Do you think that Kyle suffered from his inception point of view, from like the backlash of that kind of editorial demand that the classic heroes get recast somewhat?
Oh, I suppose there's truth to that, but it's not something we ever really worried about. It. We didn't have any real back door built into the storyline to have Hal come back. That was something we never even discussed. It was, what Emerald Twilight was very much the next iteration of what DC had done with killing Superman and breaking Batman's back and having somebody else take over. This was the next franchise to sort of get that treatment, but the difference was that ours was not going to go back. Ours was a new character in a new direction. To a certain extent, like Wally West taking over when Barry Allen died in the 80s. The main difference there being that Wally had sort of grown up in that heroic tradition, and we just, made up a new guy from whole cloth. And so that sense of replacing the hero, I mean, that's been part and parcel of comics for decades. And that's because superhero comics are largely about the illusion of change, not real change. The Fantastic Four, Johnny and Ben quit and two new members come in and everybody loses their minds. Well, that's not going to be permanent. That's not going to be the way it is forever. Exactly. But you have to take something away from the audience before the audience really values it sometimes.
You don't realize what you've got till it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, when a few years ago when fans were freaking out about Marvel replacing Thor and Iron Man and Captain America, and I'm thinking, have you guys never read a comic before? Are you unaware that this is a temporary thing, and that there's a movie called The Avengers coming out in the near future, and everything's going to be back to the way it was by the time that movie hits? So it's a sleight of hand trick that publishers do to make things, to upset the apple cart, to make things seem like they're changing, when in point of fact, there's no real change. I mean, Clark Kent is always going to be Superman, and Bruce Wayne is always going to be Batman, and Peter Parker is always going to be Spider-Man. These are fictional icons. They're not just comic icons. They're icons on the level of Sherlock Holmes and Dracula. They're the most recognizable characters in the world. Ultimately, superhero stories are an origin and then a lot of middle because there's no end to the story.
Unless you count Dark Knight Returns.
So monthly superhero comics are middle, and you're never actually gonna get the last Batman story because we're just gonna keep telling them after you and I are both long gone.
See, that's why The Empire Strikes Back's the best Star Wars movie. It's all middle.
Yeah, well, and it's all middle, and things happened in it, like things were, dire consequences happened.
Yeah, don't spoil it in case anybody hasn't read it.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, if you haven't seen The Empire Strikes Back.
So so I tend to be really thankful that we got the opportunity to do that and to make it much more of a permanent kind of scenario.
And that works even now. I mean, if you look back even now, Kyle Rayner's still a part of the Green Lantern Corps. It's not as if when Hal came back, it eradicated him from history. It didn't redact him out. It didn't give him any less purpose. It did. I mean, he's still alive. I mean, he's in Titans right now. So there you go. I mean, he's still out and about doing his thing. Yeah,
it's very cool to have created a character that resonates with people, and I think a certain generation of comic readers, Kyle is their Green Lantern because that's when they discovered the book, which is really cool. And the fact that he's still around and still part of that franchise is terrifically flattering for me and for Darryl Banks, and very satisfying. It's nice to have created something that has some permanence and still has people that are dedicated to it.
So I have a question. It's a little bit controversial when it comes to Kyle Rayner. I'll give you just a little bit of backstory before we go there. I was working for a company and it was my birthday, and the guy one of my colleagues had gone to a charity shop and picked up a couple of comic books, and one of them was a Green Lantern one. He said, "Oh, he's a happy birthday. There's a present for you." And gave me this Green Lantern comic because he knew I was into Green Lantern, to the fact that I've got a Green Lantern tattoo on my arm. That's how nuts I am. So I'm reading it. I'm like, wait a second. Kyle's in this. And that purple dude, this isn't that issue, is it? But it is. It's the issue, the Phrygian issue, that seems to get so much hate. And I kind of read the book. I was like, wow, this is really, really good. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much. And then, of course, I knew that it was, after reading it, I was like, this is the issue that everybody kicks off about. Were you, the whole Phrygian of, it's the term, isn't it? The Phryging of Kyle's girlfriend. Was that a kind of, like a wake-up moment for the guys on the team, do you think? Or was it just kind of part of the storyline to go along with, to get motivation for the character? Because that issue does tend to get a lot of criticism down the line.
Frankly, there had been so much grief over taking Hal out of the book and replacing him with Kyle, and so much outcry. Letters to the editor and death threats mailed, snail mail to the office, and big online controversy and all that stuff, that I think we were sort of armored up at that point. We'd sort of gotten, all right, well, this is just what happens. And honestly, at the time, I don't recall a huge, there was some outcry about Alex's death. But there was not the huge, it wasn't then what it is now.
Well, I'm gonna swing for your defense on this, because I look at that book and I can name at least several. I'll change that. I can name at least 2 Star Trek writers who generally put women characters in just for the reason to get them killed. And I think when nobody kicks off about that. In the movie Seven, have you seen it with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman? The only reason Gwyneth Paltrow is in that movie is to get done in at the end. Sorry, spoiler alert. She's killed. Sorry. And I didn't notice it the first time I watched the movie. I was like enthralled as everybody. I was like, wow, that's a really great movie. But I was recently watching the movie with my stepdaughter, and I'm watching it. I'm thinking there is no other reason for that character to be there than for that. Whereas in the Green Lantern book, she was a key part of Kyle's life for a large portion of that. So there was resonance.
We certainly look. From her introduction, I knew that she was going to be killed off, and I wanted to make sure. People often compare Alex's death to, Gwen Stacy, who got killed off by Jerry Conway and.
Wait, Gwen's dead? I've just seen a cartoon and she's fine.
Yeah, it's weird. People get better in comics. It's really, the comparison is often to Gwen Stacy. And it never even occurred to me when we were writing it, or when I was writing it and we were creating the issue, that it was a Gwen Stacy sort of thing. To me, it was much more about, that was Kyle's Uncle Ben moment, where him not taking his responsibilities seriously enough ends up destroying someone that's close to him. Somebody pays the price for him not being the hero that he should be. And to me, it was very much drawn from that Spider-Man tradition. And I wanted to make sure that when we created Alex, that she was actually kind of a more likable character than he was. She was the one that was level-headed, and she kept him on an even keel. Initially this kid getting a magic ring that allows him to do anything he wants, it is like winning the lottery. It's the best thing in the world. And I wanted to show that coin had another side, that if you don't take it seriously, and if you don't have the sense of responsibility that comes with this thing, that the people around you are going to pay the price. So that's what happened. And frankly, I went into it knowing that we were going to kill off her character, and also knowing that I wanted people to be upset about it. If you're going to kill off a character in a book and people don't really care, you haven't done your job properly.
That's a really good shout. I think it's probably one of the things that kind of is the knock against Jean Grey, is the fact she's died and come back so many times. But hey ho. Yeah,
well, ultimately, and it's sort of one of the tropes of superhero comics that's difficult, is that death has very little meaning in superhero comics, because everybody's going to come back at some point anyway.
Okay, cool. So looking through your list of books, I have been mistaken. I used to think that you were just a main Marvel guy with some Green Lantern thrown in for some kind of parity. But looking back, you've done like shed loads of DC books as well as Marvel. So of all the characters you've worked on, big two characters, which one's been your favorite and which one's been the biggest challenge?
If I had to pick one character that was a favorite to write, and maybe not counting Kyle, since it's sort of like, that's like picking one of your own kids to win the prize.
Now, coach, can't do that.
I think I probably enjoyed writing Superman more than almost any of them, because Superman was the first one. From all of this comes from Superman. All of this stems from Superman. So I did a Superman story with Doc Shaner, and I've written Superman in other appearances and other series and all that kind of stuff. But I did a specific Superman story with Doc Shaner that was really sort of, this is the Superman story I've always wanted to tell. And it came out just great because, Doc is a genius and really captured what I wanted to say about Superman. So I more than anything, I think Superman is the guy, and probably a lot more difficult to write well than a number of other characters, because because he does what he does because it's the right thing. It's not, he's not trying to avenge the death of his parents. He's not. He's driven to do the right thing because it's the right thing, which is unfortunately maybe a rarer motivation for characters than it should be.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think if Clark Kent didn't have powers and he saw someone getting mugged, he'd still try and stop them.
Yeah,
because of Clark Kent. It's not. I mean, Superman's the power set, and Kal-El is the Kryptonian dude. But when you break him down to his whole idea of good versus right, good versus evil or right versus wrong, that's pure Clark Kent. It's nobody else.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons I always love the pairing of Batman and Superman with each other, because they're such contrasts. One is, one has all the power in the world. One is completely unpowered in that sense. And also, they're both products of their upbringing or lack thereof.
That's a great point.
Clark Kent is Superman because he was raised by the right parents.
Yeah.
And Bruce Wayne is Batman because he wasn't raised by his parents.
See, I have this argument at work all the time. Because I have loads of people come in at work and see my tattoos and say, "Oh, you're a geek." I'm like, "Yeah, I am a geek." And the first thing they always ask me is, who would win in a fight, Batman versus Superman? And I always say Batman. And they say, "Oh, right, what if you didn't have kryptonite?" I say, "Well, it's still Batman." And it's like, because Superman doesn't even think. You see, if I was Superman and I saw someone in front of me, I'd just laser beam the dude. Heat vision, poof, done, move on. But Superman, Clark Kent, he's not like that. It's nature versus nurture every time. And that's why Batman would always win, because he always fights dirty.
Yeah, Batman cheats. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is Batman cheats. Yeah.
But in a good way, because we all love Batman, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I absolutely adore writing Batman, too. But frankly, one of the things that I've enjoyed the most is the rare occasions when I've been able to write Batman and Superman together, because they're such complete contrasts. They're such completely different characters. It's, when you have a bunch of characters that are all the same, it's not a terribly interesting story. If your characters are substantially different, that's when you get into the good stuff. And
that's why Justice League still works. So for me, I've got to ask a quick question. How hard is it to write Superman then, when he's got with his power set so high? Because I mean, it's Superman. The dude can push planets if he wanted to. In fact, I remember reading The Brave and Bold with Adam Strange, where he did exactly that. So it's kind of like, where is the threat for somebody that powerful?
Well, if your main concern with Superman is who he's fighting and how powerful they are and how he can use his powers, you're not writing the right story. Superman stories are not really, the best Superman stories are not really about his power set. The best Superman stories are about his, are about the inner struggles that he has.
Bingo.
The fact that he is the best of us, but he is not one of us. The fact that he's ultimately alone. He is in the sort of the classic conception of the character, he's the last son of Krypton. And he's forever one of us, but forever apart from us. So the best Superman stories are not about how Superman throws punches. It's about how he approaches doing what's right, how he decides to do what's right, and the emotional price that he has to pay for that, the sacrifices that he has to make to be Superman. Those are the best Superman stories, not the ones where he where he's fighting somebody. That's why Lex Luthor is actually a really terrific villain for him, because he's such a contrast to Superman. Lex Luthor's not powered in any way, and yet he goes toe to toe with Superman believably.
Excellent. You know what? You've said exactly the same sort of things I've been saying for a while. One of my favorite Superman stories was way back when, you could hear in his apartment building a woman getting abused by her husband, And the Superman, he wants to go in and save her, but because she won't report the husband, he can't do anything about it. And it's that inner turmoil that Clark has all this power, but he's actually not able to do anything about it. That kind of drives the story forward. And it's that sort of like that level of restraint that he has to show. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying regarding Superman. So
yeah, for me, the best Superman story is, and probably always will be, For the Man Who Has Everything by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And that story is not about Superman fighting Mongol. It's about what Superman lost when Krypton was destroyed. The fight with Mongol that happens at the end is sort of the
it's a superhero trope that has to be put in there.
Yeah, it's the denouement of the story. It's not what the story's about.
And if you haven't read the book, listeners, watch it on Justice League Unlimited. There's an episode very similar. It's based on this whole thing. Black Orchid. Go check it out. It is a classic in every sense of the word. Right, moving jet forward. You are currently on Aspen Comics at the moment. Is that right? Fathom is your current.
In on the end of my year on Fathom, and I've enjoyed it immensely. It's been a lot of fun to. It's one of the cool things about this job is that you get to go play with toys that you haven't played with before.
So before you go too far into this, I'll tell you now that I picked up issue 7 today of Fathom. So I haven't read it yet. I've avoided the reviewing the book on Comic Crusaders purely because I'm enjoying the story. So don't spoil it for me. What's it like working for a company like Aspen, who I know over in the States might be kind of on the cusp of being a really big publisher, but over here in the UK, I've had to beg, borrow, and steal for my comic book shop to buy this book in for me. Go figure.
Well, Aspen has been, so obviously Aspen is the company that Michael Turner founded, and obviously we lost Michael a number of years ago, but they're still there. They're still doing their books. They're still doing concepts that Michael created, first and foremost, Fathom and Soulfire. And it's very much a family. It's very much guys that have been doing this for most of them for the 15 years that Aspen has been a going concern. And frankly, the way that my relationship with them came about is that I was in Cuba on a sort of creative mission, maybe is the best way to describe it, or a creative and cultural exchange with comics people from the U.S. Went to Cuba a couple years ago, and thanks to MAD Productions, which is run by Martha Donato, who puts on conventions in the U.S., including the Long Beach show that I was just at a few weekends ago. And so they brought us down there to kind of interface with the Cuban creative community. And it was an amazing trip. I'm forever grateful. And one of the other people that was there, that was on the trip, is Vince Hernandez from Aspen Comics. And we just, we sort of bonded over comics and mojitos. And he said, "Hey, why don't you think about writing something for us?" And the obvious answer was Fathom, since I had just come off of like a 10-year run on Witchblade, which was also a Michael Turner creation along with the writers at Top Cow. So it just was a very good fit, and I'm grateful that I got the chance to play with that toy, and hopefully we're talking about doing some other things with some of the other properties there.
So the artist on Fathom at the moment is Sia Om. Did I pronounce that right? I am renowned for getting names wrong, so apologies, Saya, if I've got it wrong. How is it working with Saya, who herself is her own creator, writer-creator of Lola XOXO?
She's amazing. She's absolutely who I wanted to work with on the book. and I just assumed that I would not have that opportunity because she does Lola and it's her own book, and why would she want to stop doing Lola to come work with me on Fathom? So I was even hesitant to suggest it when we started talking about artists, and before I even suggested it, Vince from Aspen came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about maybe working with Sia on the book?" And I couldn't say yes fast enough.
Definitely,
I just think a huge talent.
Great.
I was a big fan of her stuff before we started working together, and I'm an even bigger fan now.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. I love some of the Lola stuff. Her artwork has kind of like a painted quality. It's very stylized. There's cartoon elements in there for like faces and so on. Her Lola stuff is different to her Fathom stuff. I don't know if that's because she's trying to maintain kind of like a house style. I don't know what the line is on that. But kind of when it comes to people like Sarah Orman, we mentioned way back when you mentioned about writers and artists and people not understanding what a writer does. How is it with comics being such a collaborative affair between writer, artist, inker, letterer, colorist, and all the rest of them? How is it that certain people like Sayer and people like Frank Miller to an extent, and people like John Byrne have managed to sort of like cast aside those sort of barriers and being a writer penciler themselves? How's that worked? Is that kind of like just an oddity type thing, or is that like, wow, those guys are like super talented?
Well, yeah, both actually. It's we certainly those writers of us who can't draw are insanely jealous of the ones that can draw and write. Because they basically don't need us at all. But obviously that's there's a huge tradition of writer artists, which I guess you could basically just call cartoonists. In comic strips and comic books from their inception. They were that the line can be very blurry between the two jobs, and certainly the ones that can write and draw and do it well, way back to Hal Foster and Alex Raymond, through Kirby and Frank Miller and Will Eisner, and honestly, the ones who do it well are probably the best of us.
Okay.
Those are the ones who really, I think, push the medium forward. And so I'm always glad when I see artists taking a stab at writing their own stuff. Guess what just happened?
I wonder what just happened there.
We'll go back and pick that part up, I guess.
Yeah, it's fine.
But they'll stop briefly, in brief they'll stop.
What sort of dogs have you got?
We've got a German Shepherd, and we've got a rescue that we got from Alabama that is, we believe, half golden retriever and half a southern breed that I had actually never heard of, called a black-mouthed cur, which I guess is a hunting dog in the South. So when we rescued him, we were under the impression that he was, that as advertised, he was supposed to be half German Shepherd and half
Retriever.
It's the Turkish Shepherd breed, and I'm blanking on it.
It's all right.
But once we got the dog, there was that's not what he was. See, obviously they're quiet now. So do you want to ask that one again, and I'll.
I can't. What was the question?
About writer artists, or I can just.
That's fine. That's fine. We'll leave it at that. That's fine. I'll cut it out from when the dogs start barking. It's fine. I think the last line you said was they're the best of us, and that'll be fine. We'll just call it there. Right. Okay. Whew, I've lost my train. Right. Back on track. Are you ready?
Hit me.
Hit me. Which do you prefer? Not that I want to start kind of like curtail any sort of future endeavors for you, but do you prefer working big two, or now that you've sampled some of the indie books out there, which kind of method is your kind of bag right now?
I want to play with all the toys. I want the whole smorgasbord, and I think that being a writer allows you to do that a lot more than being an artist. As an artist, you basically can take on one assignment at a time. So just the level of commitment that you have to put in to draw a monthly book is intense and immense. So you can't juggle a whole lot of stuff when you're an artist. You sort of have to choose. As a writer, you can do your big two stuff, your work for hire stuff, and you can also do creator owned stuff and stuff for other publishers. It's a balancing act, and I think it allows writers to do a more diverse array of projects. So I always try to have the work for hire stuff that pays the bills, along with creator owned stuff that you're basically building your library as a creator. So I've always got 4, 5, 6 things in progress at the same time. One, because I that's how I keep myself interested. I don't want to do just one thing. I want to be able to work on different things and stretch different muscles. But I also want to have the knowledge that I'm I write scripts and the checks come, but also that I'm creating new properties and building up that creator owned library, because ultimately that's, if you're going to be a success in comics long term, the creator owned stuff is a necessary aspect of that.
I suppose I've spent some time speaking with Colin Bunn, whose alternative stuff, his independent stuff for Aftershocks and his own Kickstarter stuff is dramatically different from his X-Men stuff. So when you read something that Colin's written that's not X-Men, it's like, whoa, how mature is this? How dark? And then you read his X-Men stuff, you're like, is it the same guy? So you're absolutely right. Flexing those different muscles, I think, is definitely a good way of keeping your writing skills honed to an extent.
Well, it's I tell people it's like working out at the gym. You don't just do one thing over and over, or you wind up with these huge biceps and these skinny little legs. So
that's why I don't go to the gym.
See, so it's and look, I know there are certainly creators who are not built that way, who would rather just do their thing, do whatever thing that they love, whether it's the superheroes that they grew up reading or horror books or whatever it happens to be. There are certainly people that just want to do that thing, and that's totally cool. Everybody should do what inspires them and what they're passionate about. I get inspired by a lot of different stuff, so that tends to be why I work on a bunch of different stuff.
Right.
If I'm writing I've got a World War II story that I'm doing with Darryl Banks right now, and it's great. I really enjoy doing it, but my next thing after that isn't going to be a World War II story. It's going to be something completely different.
Okay. So of all the characters that you've worked on, of all the books that you've kind of spent time with, are there any characters that you've kind of missed out on that you thought, hey, you know what, I'd really like to do a really good Huntress versus Power Girl story or whatever?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be able to play, like I said, with most of the toys in the toy box, doing a crossover like DC versus Marvel. I got to play with everybody. But there are always characters that I feel like I'd like to do more with. I've written Doctor Strange a little bit here and there, not in his own monthly title, but that's always a character I've loved. Dr. Fate at DC, I don't think I've ever written at all. So that's still sort of out there. And then a character that I've always been fond of and have written a little bit here and there, but never never on a monthly book is Tarzan. I grew up as a big fan of Edgar Rice Burroughs, both the novels and the Tarzan comics that were coming out when I was a kid, and that's still sort of my biggest unfulfilled ambition is to do a monthly Tarzan book.
Well, I think Dynamite have the license for Tarzan at the moment. Is that right?
Well, it's a very hazy kind of thing, because Dynamite does Lord of the Jungle, which is obviously Tarzan, but it's not called Tarzan. Dark Horse actually has the specific Tarzan license, so you see some Tarzan stuff come from them. And ultimately, a great deal of Tarzan is in public domain now because of when it was created and when Edgar Rice Burroughs passed away. So it's sort of all over the place. And then I actually do I do weekly comic strips for the Edgar Rice Burroughs website. I do Korak and Mucker, both of which are kind of on hiatus, but we're getting them both back up and running for EdgarRiceBurroughs.com. That they do Sunday newspaper style strips of about 24 Burroughs properties. So yeah, a lot of those rights are a little hazy because of how, when the character was created. But when push comes to shove, that would be my one answer is let me do a Tarzan monthly book.
All right. Okay. Right. Okay then. Final question. Are you ready?
Hit me.
It's a big one. Who would win in a fight? Aspen, Aquaman, or Namor?
Whoever I say.
Sorry, you've got to say why. You can't just say whoever I say.
That's ultimately where what any of these questions come down to is that's why I have the coolest job is I get to decide. So if I had to say whether it was Aspen Matthews or Arthur Curry or Prince Namor, I would have to say Prince Namor because he's the biggest asshole out of all of them, and he would cheat.
Fair enough. I'll let you have that one. All right, excellent. Okay, thank you, Ron, for taking time out of your day. So much for spending some time with us and going through your career. It has been an absolute pleasure. You are one of the most underrated comic book writers that have been around for, as we said at the start of the show, decades. Thank you so much for contributing so much to comic books, and please keep doing what you're doing. I absolutely love the last series of Fathom. So you've still got it, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I have studiously avoided getting a real job for almost 30 years now, and we're gonna keep it that way for as long as possible. And thank you. It's very kind, and this has been a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you for taking the time out. Okay, everyone. Thanks once again to Ron. Don't forget to check out UCPN for all your favorite podcasts, including Flipside Focus, The Definitive Crusade, and of course, No Prize Podcast. This is Johnny the Machine Hughes saying see ya.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.